get my 6. Ha! Tricked you, didn't I? For those of you who like to guess which side of the camera I'm coming from, I put my chair over there. Came in from the other side. You never saw that coming. Why did I do that? Because I'm crazy! Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid. A beautiful October afternoon. I think the leaves have reached their peak here in my part of the world, Central Virginia. And I had the camera set up for today's story, set up like where you could see like a quarter of a mile's worth of our property, like from the longest width it stretches. And the dude that lives over on the other side of the property line starts mowing his grass just as I'm ready to start recording. So had to come back over here. It's all good. So I was a little flustered, feeling like a man brat. So I figured I'd come at you from the other side. What is today's date? October 14. Guys, let me tell you, the veil is thin and there's some weird stuff coming through it. And it's having some strange frequencies going on. I actually recorded some oddity, about 8 minutes worth of footage earlier in the day. It looked like a clump of weeds, like sawgrass, moving around in the field on its own. So I went in and got the camera. I was in my hammock, taking a nap. Saw it, went in and got the camera, recorded it. Clearly hit record, and then it just stopped. I walked up to it, and I put my head down a couple times, and like this clump of sawgrass, like dispersed, and there was no clump. It was just grass everywhere, sawgrass. So I went back to look at the footage. It had not recorded. Nothing had been recorded, and this is a perfectly working iPhone, whatever number it was when I bought it. So I don't know. It was really odd. It was as odd and weird as a freaking family of skunking towels. What's that? You don't know what the hell a skunking towel is? Where have you been? Living under a rock? Have you been living under a family of skunking towels? Look. Oh, I got us a cute little family of skunking towels right here. Look at this. Here's Mama Skunking Towel. Where's she got? 5 babies on her back. Oh, aren't they cute? Look at that. These ones are weaned. These are weaned and they're ready to go to a new home. That new home can be yours. This is available on our Etsy store. The link is in the description box below. We've actually got a couple sets of skunking towels available. I made these. These are my creations. I've created this monster. This is a new monster. See, they're part skunk. You can tell by the way the babies ride on the back of the mama like a possum. And then they're part pumpkin because they're orange. And then they're part reptile. Skunking towel, yeah. Because they look like snakes and lizards. And they have tongues. They're just inside their mouth. Look at that. Cute little family of skunking towels. You can put it on your porch steps. Put it in your rock garden and your flower beds. All of these come right off. And like I said, they are weaned. So if you take them up, whoop, don't worry, Mama. It's okay. All right. Well, let's get into today's reading. Today is October 14, and the title of our story is The Man to Beat. The Man to Beat. Some bad words in this one, be warned. I've never been a fan of violence for violence's sake. Most folks would identify as the same, but when you're brought up in a rough environment where violence is commonplace, you have a tendency to feel as if you're the odd man out if you don't actually enjoy violence. Growing up in West by God, Virginia, or Central Appalachian, as I often refer to the area, Appalachian, of course, encasing all of Appalachia, violence was simply part of the culture. Whether it was violence in the home, where beating the living shit out of your child for any slight infraction or even imagined infractions was all part of a normal day, and never questioned by neighbors or teachers at school because, well, most of them beat the shit out of their kids too and merely called it discipline, or the regular fight at school, whether in the halls or on the playground, or while in middle school and high school out in the parking lot of the closest off-campus property. Fistfights, sucker punches, and random attacks were all to be expected. It was, in many ways, merely viewed as a form of local entertainment in an area where most folks would have to drive for hours to get to a movie theater. Oh, that was just the garbage truck down there at the end of the driveway. Don't pay that. No, never mind. And if you thought there was a problem with it, well, you were just a coward and a JJ. My childhood friend, Tracy, would have been one to question the insanity of all the local violent entertainment had he not been prepared from a young age to take part. You see, Tracy was a little guy. It didn't help that he'd been given an androgynous name. Boy, did the redneck hillbillies love coming at Tracy with teases about that. "I think you're a little girl," some older redneck hillbilly bully would say to Tracy as he was walking down the hall in grade school, or while we were out on the playground. Kids who were literally twice Tracy's size would seize the opportunity, viewing both his size and his name as a weakness. And then Tracy would knock them on their asses. You see, Tracy's father, not a big man himself, had been a boxer in the U.S. Army, and he'd been a good one. He knew his son was small, and he realized the curse he and his wife had put upon their smaller than average sized son by giving him an androgynous name in Appalachistan, of all places, but they named him after his mother's brother who had died in childhood, so the name was special. Whereas such a name would be celebrated in an area like my current home, Charlottesville, Virginia, it was to be dogged and demeaned in my native Appalachistan. Tracy's father prepared Tracy for the bullying and ridicule he would no doubt face, which he certainly did, upon entering school by teaching him how to box. "You're small and you have a girl's name," he told his young son. "People are going to pick on you. They're going to view you as an easy target. It's my aim, no pun intended, to make you a very undesirable target." And he did. The first time I ever saw Tracy get into a fight, we were in kindergarten. We'd gone out onto the playground for recess while some of the older kids were still outside on the playground. A bully, who was in 4th grade by the way, approached Tracy and said, "I'm a-gonna whoop your ass." Tracy punched the 4th grade bully one time, and it took 3 teachers to carry the kid, who was knocked out cold, to the nurse's office. You see, one of the tenets that Tracy's father had instilled in him was this: if you know you are going to be in a fight and there is no way to avoid it, hit first and hit hard. And that's just what Tracy spent his life doing. Despite his size, Tracy could punch harder pound for pound than anyone I've ever known, ever since my days back in Appalachistan, and this including after serving in the infantry for the U.S. Army myself. To illustrate, I only need to tell of the time when in high school, and while outside having lunch on a beautiful spring day, Tracy was approached by the biggest guy in our school. The man-child's name was Bud. He stood 6 feet and 6 inches tall and weighed 320 pounds if he weighed an ounce, and he was not fat. In comparison, Tracy, now that he was 17 and fully grown, physically at least, stood at 5 feet 6 inches tall and probably weighed 130 pounds. If, as we'd say back in Appalachistan, he were soaking wet. "I heard you call my mama a whore," the oversized man-child said to Tracy after walking up to our small group of friends. He spit a big old nasty wad of wintergreen skull juice in front of Tracy's feet after having spoken, as if to add an exclamation mark to his statement. As it was, the man-child's mother was Tracy's school bus driver. Tracy denied the accusation, and we all believed him. We knew those redneck hillbillies would say anything to start a fight. And though Tracy could fight like no one I'd ever seen before or since, he never started any trouble with anyone, nor did he ever want any. He was very quiet, a true introvert, and he never even spoke ill of others. However, in a roughneck area like Appalachistan, and I'm sure perhaps in the inner cities, once you've established yourself as the man to beat, because you've beaten so many others who challenged you, you will continually be challenged. This was Tracy's curse for having been taught how to defend himself from a very early age. "I'm a-gonna whoop your ass," the mammoth man-child said, and before he could spit another wad of skull juice, Tracy hit him with an uppercut that lifted all 320 pounds of his redneck hillbilly ass 6 inches off his feet and laid him out cold. It took 8 teachers to get that man-child bully to the nurse's office. After high school, I went off to college, as did several of my friends. We were all first-generation college students, mostly the products of bewetted high school dropouts. A few of us actually ended up graduating from college, which was the equivalent of man's first step on the moon when you come from lower socioeconomic status in Appalachia, like we did. You'll never hear such facts about our demographics, we Appalachian Americans, in the mainstream media, for obvious reasons I won't state here and which go without saying, but it's true. Some of our friends who felt they were not college material or who had no desire to go to college for any number of other reasons joined the military, and then some, including Tracy, went straight to work. These days, of course, being back before entire generations of young men would become man-children and never leave home after obtaining the age of majority to do anything. Tracy left our area, though he stayed in Appalachistan, and he pursued construction work. Though he wasn't big, as I've already illustrated, he was very physical and possessed the strength easily of a man 3 times his size, as I've clearly pointed out by now as well. He excelled in his work and was soon made crew foreman of a quite sizable and highly regarded commercial roofing company. Tracy, myself, and a third friend, Paul, for the first few years after high school at least, would meet once a year in the month of October for an annual camping/hunting trip we'd started while still in high school. We would meet up back in the wide spot beside the road that was our hometown, and then we would all jump into one vehicle and drive as far as we could up a billy goat trail that passed for a road. Then, when we could drive no further because the road became impassable, even for a 4-wheel drive vehicle, we would get out and hike the rest of the way, carrying our gear on our backs in packs. Our final destination was the top of a mountain where a century before an old logging camp had stood. There were still the remnants of several cabins and of the mess hall, and the mess hall still had 2 adjoining walls that were still standing. They'd been made out of stone that had been cleared from the area while the camp was being constructed. The builders had either run out of stone or realized it was too much work and had switched over to lumber, but the 2 walls remained nonetheless, and we would always pitch our tent in the apex of the walls in order to get a windbreak, at least partially, and if we were fortunate enough for the wind to be blowing from that direction. Our first night at camp, during one particular October, having gotten set up less than an hour before nightfall, consisted of the usual beer drinking and banter, catching up on how each of us had been over the course of the past year, etc. I'd given the update on how I was doing in college, track and field and cross-country life, and of course girls. Paul updated us on his situation, the same as mine. He was just attending a different college and not participating in athletics, but of course he was participating in, you guessed it, girls. And then Tracy updated us on his success as a roofer and his success with, yep, girls. We openly confessed our fondness of girls back then. I guess that's considered offensive these days. Here's a little sidebar. Whatever. I got to start one of these days. Whatever. Got to remember where I am on social media. Okay. We maintained our discipline and did not overindulge too heavily in drink, though we'd taken the means to do so. We were simply more excited about hunting the next morning than we were binge drinking, as at that time in our lives, we were all doing plenty of that away from our once-a-year camping trip anyway. For the life of me, I cannot even remember what it was we were hunting, because the next day none of us killed anything. We'd eaten breakfast at camp, we'd all packed separate lunches, and then we'd all gone out 3 separate ways to hunt. I think we were turkey and squirrel hunting, but with the passing of nearly 30 years since that time, I cannot be certain. However, I do remember what happened at the end of the day, and the events that took place are the highlight of this tale. Tracy, Paul, and I met up at our agreed-upon spot about half an hour before dark. We'd timed it to where we could maximize our hunting time during daylight hours, yet still managed to get back to the campsite by dark. We were walking together, talking softly, when we noticed, as we got back to camp, that someone whom we didn't know and who we'd never even seen was standing and leaning back against a tree with his arms crossed. We stopped in our tracks and looked at this fellow, who appeared to be a little older than us, about 30, and who was dressed a bit oddly. He was dressed appropriately for fall in Appalachistan, wearing thick-looking trousers and a flannel shirt, but something about his dress appeared odd, perhaps dated being the better word. He had a beanie-type cap on, black in color. He wore suspenders to hold his pants up rather than a belt, and he wore boots which appeared to have spikes on them, the type worn a century before by the early lumberjacks of the area. The oddest thing about his appearance, however, was the fact that he appeared to have had part of his skull caved in, as if he'd been in some sort of terrible accident in the past. "Which one of you is the man to beat?" the stranger said, moving away from the tree now, his arms still crossed, and making his way toward us. "I guess you came up here looking for me," Tracy said, already taking his backpack off. He laid it on the ground and did the same with his rifle. Another oddity of this situation, aside from the fact that we'd never seen this man, was the fact that other than our immediate family members, no one knew we were at this location camping. How on earth could some stranger have heard that Tracy would be here, and why on earth would they make the long, hard trip just to engage in an unnecessary fistfight? "I say I'm the man to beat," the stranger said, and he got into a fighting stance as Tracy drew near him. "You came a long way just to get your ass kicked," Tracy said, now assuming his fighting stance. But just as Tracy had gotten the words out of his mouth, he was eating a knuckle sandwich from his opponent. The man had thrown a left jab so quickly it was as if he'd never thrown it at all. One of Ali's famous ghost punches, you might say. He was so fast, all you could see was his shoulder move a bit, but it had been as if he'd merely flinched. Had Tracy's head not swung back due to the force of the blow, and had blood not spewed from his lower lip, we would have never known the punch had been thrown. Tracy, realizing he was up for a challenge, began dancing on his toes and slipping a few jabs of his own. They all landed, but the stranger looked as if he enjoyed it. He actually smiled after each time he was hit. After feeling Tracy out, as it were, he threw a quick combination, a left jab followed by a right cross, and Tracy was on his ass. "Holy shit," Paul and I said in unison. The roles, at least the roles we'd been used to, had been reversed. We had never seen Tracy get knocked down. Come to think of it, we'd never seen anyone land a punch against him. Tracy got up and he got back in the fight, but it was pretty much more of the same. Each time he hit the stranger, and he landed several mighty blows that would have knocked most men down, the stranger merely smiled as if he were enjoying it, and then he would return the barrage with a combination of his own that sent Tracy to the ground again. "Just call it, Tracy," Paul and I said. This was a tradition in Appalachian fist fighting. Once you'd had enough, whether you'd started the fight, had begrudgingly agreed to take part, or had wanted no part in it at all, when you said, "I call it," the fight was over. It was considered a surrender, and if one's opponent didn't respect this desire to stop the fight, and they continued to beat the man who'd call it, the whole crowd would jump in on the aggressor and whip his ass, including his friends. It was all part of hillbilly tradition, and one did not disrespect the tradition without unpleasant consequences. Tracy would have none of it. "I've never lost a fight before," he said, "and I'm not losing one now." "The hell you ain't," the stranger said as Tracy rose once more to his feet. And then the mysterious stranger hit Tracy with an uppercut reminiscent of the uppercut Tracy had hit Big Bud the Bully with back in high school. Similarly, it lifted Tracy off his feet and sent him to the ground, but this time he was out cold. Either of you two want to count?" the stranger said, looking at Paul and me. We said nothing. This wasn't part of backwoods brawling. If a man was knocked out, it was over. Our stranger wanted Tracy to beat the count so he could whoop up on him some more. Tracy came to, and neither Paul or myself began counting. And as Tracy began to stand once more, refusing to stay down, we heard what sounded like the braying of a donkey in the near distance. "Oh shit," the stranger said, and no sooner had the words left his mouth than he was off and running at a pace that I doubt I could have kept up with, college distance running track star at the time or not. "Where you going?" "But JJ," Tracy called out after him. He was now back on his feet and ready to go another round. At least he was giving the impression of being back on his feet and ready to go another round. But Paul and I, and even Tracy, knew he was done. Just then, Tracy, Paul, and myself witnessed what is to this day one of the strangest things I have ever seen in the forest, or hell, just about anywhere in my life. A freaking donkey. Yes, a donkey came running through the woods. It blew right past us as if we weren't even there and appeared to be in hot pursuit of our mysterious prize-fighting stranger. "Was that a fucking donkey?" all three of us said together. By this time, it was nearly too dark to see anything, but the animal clearly had the form of a donkey. The next day, Tracy's face was swollen, as was to be expected, but he didn't want to go home. We remained in the woods for the rest of the weekend. We never killed anything, unless you count all the alcoholic beverages we'd taken with us, but we felt as if we'd garnered one hell of a story to tell in the future. We never did see the mysterious stranger or the equally mysterious donkey again. After our trip, and while hanging out at Paul's house for just a bit before heading back to college, Paul and I told his parents of the odd events that had taken place on our trip. Tracy had already left to go back to his commercial roofing job. "You say you guys were up at the old logging camp?" Paul's father, Paul Sr., said. We confirmed again that this was the spot. "Well, that's really odd then," Paul Sr. said. Upon pressing him, asking him to explain why it was so odd, as he called it, he did just that, and we would soon find that we were in agreement with him in regard to just how odd the situation had been. You see, a century before, our town had been quite a bit more than just a wide spot on the side of the road. It had been a boom town due to the logging and lumber industry. The town, which to date has less than 1,000 residents, at one point had more than 30,000 residents. On the weekends, the lumberjacks would come down off of the mountains and into town to drink away their weekly wages. Many of them were troublemakers, starting fights with locals or sleeping with the wives or girlfriends of local men. One of the lumberjacks in particular was known for being an excellent fighter. They claimed that there wasn't a man in the state who could whoop him. He was also, it seemed, quite the hustler. His tactic, at least until he'd been figured out, was to challenge someone to a fight and get a betting pool going during the fight. He would allow the other man to win to a point, but once the pot had grown large enough, he would knock the man out with a single blow. Once people had figured out the man's ploy, no one would take the bait. Not only did they know they were going to lose their money, but none of them were willing to take the pummeling. They knew that this man truly was the man to beat, and that there wasn't a man within a week's train ride who could stand against him, let alone beat him. This would lead to the financial ruin of the man. He continued to spend his weekly pay at the bars and then run up huge bar tabs after that, and eventually the bar owners refused to extend him credit. "I've got it," the violent lumberjack from a century past said one night when one such bar owner refused to serve him a drink due to his enormous outstanding tab. "Old Nellie's out back, she is, and I bet $1 of mine against 3 of all of yours that I can knock her out with a single blow." "You're on," the shouts began. "No man can knock out a mule," the doubters shouted. "You've met your match, you mean old son of a bitch," said others still, those of course who were far enough back in the crowd to make such statements without being seen by the violent lumberjack. After enough money had been pulled into the kitty, the entire populace of the bar walked outside and went around back. The violent lumberjack hauled off and hit old Nellie just as hard as he'd ever hit any man, right between the eyes. The old mule let out a deafening, agonizing cry, one never heard emanated by a mule before, at least not by anyone in attendance. She turned around, her head down and shaking as she did, the crowd, most standing with their mouths open in astonishment and wonder, expecting her to go down, but she did not. At the last moment, she bucked up and she hauled off and kicked the mean old lumberjack who'd punched her right in the side of the head, caving it in partially and killing him instantly. That would be the last October that Paul and Tracy and I would meet to hunt at that old mess hall cabin at the old logging camp high atop that mountain back in Appalachistan. The end. What a creepy story. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll take my skunking towels and head inside. Y'all have a wonderful, nice evening. The book's available too with an autograph from Etsy, where you can get these skunking towels. Or you can get the books without an autograph on Amazon and Kindle or print. But if you can't afford the book, or if you just don't want to buy one, just keep coming back to the channel here, Homesteading Off the Grid, every night here for the month of October, because I'm going to continue reading them, bad words and all, as you can clearly see. We've made a playlist called October Nights 2. Go to our About page and click up on the top somewhere it says Playlists, in case you've missed any of the stories before this one, now that we're about midway through the month. And we do have a playlist on there called October Nights from part 1, which was 2 years ago. So, me and this pretty mama and all her babies will see you for more, unless one of y'all will take her off my hands, next time.